I actually got rejected from Jefferies in December of 2007. And then the candidate that they wanted to hire declined the offer. And so they called me back and they were like, look, we don't want to interview anymore. Why don't you come and work for us?
What do you do after you've made it on Wall Street, when you've worked at the most prestigious firms, climbed the ladder, and earned the most senior titles? For our guest today and my friend Vishal Gupta, the answer was simple. You build something even bigger. What motivated the move?
I was interested in private equity when I was at Jefferies, and I could not get an interview anywhere.
Can you talk about what that process was like for you?
So I went back at like 11 p.m. on a Sunday night and did my final round interview. And then the next day, the head of the tech group called and said, we'd love to have you come work for us.
Why the switch to corp dev at the time?
This was a really hard transition for me because I loved the buy side and I loved the job I had in Chicago. Every private equity firm has a reputation among all the analysts, right? There were actually folks that I knew that were like, hey, even if you get this offer at TPG, just be careful because like...
Talk about that experience, like working with Michael so closely.
It was like a 7-year process for Michael Grimes to prepare for and win the Facebook IPO. He just knew that that was what he had to do.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
It's very simple.
Welcome to another episode of Wall Street Diaries, a podcast about extraordinary individuals who launched their careers on Wall Street and use that experience as a springboard to building world-class careers. We bring you the stories of people who turned that foundation into something remarkable. Now, what do you do after you've made it on Wall Street, when you've worked at the most prestigious firms, climbed the ladder, and earned the most senior titles? For our guest today and my friend Vishal Gupta, the answer was simple. You build something even bigger. Vishal started his career in investment banking, grinding through high-stakes deals at Jefferies Restructuring and Morgan Stanley's Technology Investment Banking Group. He then made the leap into megafund private equity at TPG Capital before becoming a managing director at JHL Capital, a global multi-strategy hedge fund. By most standards, that would be enough, but not for Vishal. He went on to help shape the future of transportation at Waymo, Google's self-driving car unit. And today, he's leading corporate development and the ventures arm at ServiceNow, where he's driving billion-dollar growth at one of the top enterprise software companies in the world. From Wall Street to Silicon Valley, Vishal's story is a masterclass in reinvention, risk-taking, and long-term vision. So if you've ever wondered where investment banking can really take you, this episode might just change the way you think about your career. With that said, Vishal, welcome to the show, my friend. It has been a long time since we caught up, and I'm grateful that you agreed to take time out of your busy schedule today to talk to us, man.
Thank you. It's great to catch up. That was a very nice intro. I should have you intro me every time I do anything like that.
Hey man, it's the least I can do. I try to give all my guests the intro that they deserve. So, and also, honestly, obviously this is a relatively new podcast, and I've been trying to pick people that have really interesting backgrounds that I think our audience would just be curious to learn about. So that's kind of how I thought of you. And I know we haven't talked probably almost since our MS days, which is, gosh, how many years ago is that?
Yeah, like 15,
it's like almost 15 years ago. Yeah. So I know, probably weren't expecting to hear me reach out, but honestly, I think you've just done so many different things throughout your career. And a lot of the things that you've done, I feel like are career paths that a lot of students would potentially be interested in pursuing, especially students who have the intention of going into investment banking. Most people don't stay in investment banking for the long run. And so I was just like, man, you will probably have great perspective on just the differences between all these things that you've done. And so here we are. If it's good with you, I'm probably just going to try to go in kind of a chronological order through your career. But if we start at the beginning, I'd be curious to know why you chose to start your career in investment banking. And also, obviously, you and I both graduated in 2008, which was not the best time to be trying to break into finance. Although I guess for you, you started in restructuring. So can you talk about that a little bit? Was that like a deliberate decision to go into restructuring because of where the markets were at the time? Or did it just happen by accident? And kind of what was that decision like?
Yeah. So it was not deliberate at all. So I, as you know, when you recruit for banking jobs, it all happens in the fall of the year prior to when you join. So in the fall of 2007, I was a senior at Berkeley and I was recruiting for any banking job I could get as a young, ambitious person. I wanted to go to Goldman or Morgan Stanley or, Lehman Brothers was a very, very kind of elite destination at that time. And my roommate in college actually landed an analyst role at Lehman Brothers. So he was training in the summer of 2008 when I was training at Jeffries. So, it's a funny story. So I was involved in the student government at Berkeley. My junior year at Berkeley, I was the vice president of the student government. So one of the things that meant was I took a reduced course load. And as a result, I did summer courses in the summer between my junior and senior year in order to catch up and to graduate in 4 years. And I was comfortable with that because it was a really cool role on campus, but I gave up the chance to do an internship. And so when I was recruiting in the fall of 2007, I didn't have a resume that a lot of banks were excited about because I didn't have an elite internship on my resume. I was, having to explain to people that I'd never worked before. And so
Wow.
I took any interview I could get. I had a lot of mentorship and a lot of coaching, and I didn't get any offers. I actually got rejected from Jeffries in December of 2007. And then the candidate that they wanted to hire declined the offer. And so they called me back and they were like, look, we don't want to interview anymore. Why don't you come and work for us? To which I was like, okay, well, that doesn't feel great, but I'll take the offer. It's the only one I have.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in 2008, as the world shifted toward businesses going out of business, businesses struggling, and the financial markets falling apart, Jeffries basically swung their entire analyst class into restructuring. And so it was not by design that I was recruiting into a restructuring team. I was just kind of trying to get into banking however I could. And I was really lucky because, I joined Jeffries in the summer of 2008. Like I said, my roommate was training at Lehman as they went through the process of going bankrupt. And I was working 100, 110, 120 hours a week. It was exhausting, but I was learning so much at a time when so many people at elite investment banking analyst roles were not doing very much. And so I was just really lucky that we got to work on such interesting projects. The Circuit City bankruptcy, I worked on a few other bankruptcy projects. I genuinely thought in my first year of banking that I was going to be like a career restructuring guy because that's all we were thinking about for that period of time.
That's crazy. No, I also graduated in '08, and I had a couple of close friends who ended up at Lehman, and obviously they got let go, like 1 month into the job, maybe less, right? So I still remember that vividly. And then I did my junior summer at Bear Stearns in summer 2007.
Wow.
I was a part of the last summer class ever at Bear Stearns, and I also had to recruit for full-time just like you because I didn't get a return offer. And at the time, like there are two hedge funds that collapsed, but like the firm was still around during full-time recruiting and they hadn't been acquired by JP Morgan yet. And so people were kind of like, you didn't get a return offer? Like,
Yeah.
is it because you were a bad intern or, and then
Right.
you explain like, well, you're reading the Wall Street Journal, right? Like you know what's going on in the news, but like still people kind of like, it's so competitive that they have way more candidates, way more supply than demand. And if there's any question that they have about you, they'd rather not take the chance, right?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
it was probably similar for you, where it's like, oh, you didn't do a summer internship. Well, you might be great, but why take that chance? So like that was probably kind of like the situation,
Yeah.
right? But I guess like you didn't know you want to do banking. It sounds like you didn't know you wanted to do banking earlier enough to even recruit for the summer internship. Then you weren't aware. Were you aware that you had to? It's how important it was to get the summer internship?
I think I was. I don't think I appreciated just how challenging it would be. So I studied econ and business at Berkeley, and I was really interested in going into finance. And of course, all the smart finance people ahead of us said, go into investment banking. It's the perfect training grounds for, whatever career you want to have in finance. And so when I was going into student government and I was thinking about the implications of kind of running for a very large position in the student government, I knew I'd have to give up my summer after junior year in order to graduate on time. And that was also, I had spoken to the people who had those positions in student government before me. I think my thought process at the time was I'll figure it out. I'll still talk to people. I'll try to train, on the side. I'll get interview prep from friends who've gone into banking.
Yeah.
And it's just not that simple, right? Because to your point, there's so many candidates that the easiest thing for a bank to do is say, well, this candidate has, Morgan Stanley on their resume, so they're clearly qualified. That candidate, I have to tell a story. I have to explain from the get-go why they don't have any experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think back then, even though because I was in a business fraternity, so I knew I should recruit for a summer internship because that's what everyone was doing. But I didn't realize the significance of the summer internship.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I was just very naive. But even when I got to the internship, I didn't realize that the point of me being here is because they're evaluating me and my performance to see if they want to bring me back for
Yeah.
full time. And I also didn't realize that the vast majority of the full time offers come from the summer intern class, meaning like if you don't get a return offer and you have to re-recruit for full time, usually you're fighting for like the last 1 or 2 spots in the group that haven't been filled yet, right? And sometimes the entire group is full and there are no spots. Like when I went to DB, our first year analyst class was 5 people and we had one opening because 4 of them were returning interns and I got the one spot.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just extremely tough. And if you don't do the summer internship, even though you can recruit for full time, you're still competing against other people who did do the summer internship somewhere else, and maybe they're trying to trade up to a better bank or whatever.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's just and I think for us back then, we had the luxury of waiting until junior year to recruit for our junior summer internship, which is like, pretty reasonable, I would say.
Yeah.
Nowadays, they start opening those applications in like the first semester of sophomore year.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
That's
so
right.
like if you don't know that you want to do investment banking as soon as you become a college student, you're kind of like already behind, right? Which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But okay, so then you do the restructuring thing. And so was that, you said they adapted the group to move people over to restructuring. So were they mostly like tech bankers originally, and then that got converted to restructuring basically?
Yeah. So at the time, Jefferies was not as large as many of the other banks, but they had a very elite specialized group doing restructuring banking. They also had a technology banking group in Foster City. So from a Bay Area standpoint, the expectation was that you could work on technology if you were in the Bay Area. You could also work on restructuring projects.
Yeah.
And then in New York, they had a huge team, and that team was organized by different industries, and they had, leveraged finance and all of that. Basically, when we got into training in the summer, they decided to just put all those people into restructuring because that's where all the work was going. And so, every analyst that was joining, even the guys in Texas who were like, yeah, I'm joining for oil and gas, like they were doing oil and gas restructuring. And I think that was an interesting observation I had around restructuring is kind of a horizontal craft, just like M&A is horizontal. You can apply that skill toward anything, LevFin, similar.
Yeah.
Whereas if you come in with a specific industry vertical that you're supposed to be a subject matter expert in, you start to get very, very specific and you start to get very specialized. So I was grateful with the benefit of hindsight. Learning as much as we did in restructuring was awesome. Circuit City bankruptcy was obviously very high profile. And so I was just like drinking from the fire hose. And then there's this company called Rath Gibson, which was out in Illinois. I got shipped out there as an analyst to help them rebuild their financial model as they were entering a bankruptcy process. And if you ever want super intense kind of modeling training, go do that. Like basically I sat in a conference room for a week with the CFO, and as kind of a immediate post-college guy who was still learning how to do everything, I was rebuilding a weekly 3-statement forecast for him. And it was just the most fascinating thing, because the question was not like, okay, how do we grow revenue? How do we grow profitability? The question was like, based on our P&L, how do we extract more cash out of our working capital management? And so it was just an incredible crash course in the puts and takes of running a business, making financial decisions for a business, and keeping a business alive, and then getting creative on the balance sheet around how much debt can this business support? How do I convince creditors to do that? How are they going to look at risk and interest expense or interest rates on the debt that they give us? It was really fascinating, top to bottom. And so I came out of, a year or 16 months or so at Jefferies thinking, man, I just got some of the best training I think I could have ever asked for. And it was exhausting, of course, but it was worth it.
Yeah. At the time, I'm sure you were super tired. In hindsight, you're like, wow, that was amazing. I mean, honestly, you're probably 21, 22 years old at the time?
Yeah, 22.
Most 22-year-olds do not have a seat at the table for that kind of discussion, that kind of just important decision-making process, right? So I think that's what people talk about when they talk about the learning experience in banking. Because I think restructuring is actually, obviously back in 08, very timely given where the market was. I think we're kind of at the point in the market again after a very long time where a lot of people think maybe we might go into a recession, right? Who knows? And also I find from working with students a lot over the past 8 years, like restructuring has become more and more popular in recent years, especially because a lot of the elite boutiques, like the Evercores and PJTs and Lazars of the world, Moelis, they all have a restructuring practice. And So there's more and more interest now. Like back, honestly, when I was in college, I didn't even know what restructuring was. Do you have any advice for people who are interested in going down that career path? And also, are there things that they should think about, whether it's, pros and cons? Like, for example, when I think about restructuring, one concern that I might have if I were a student is like, is this a career that would only do well during recessions, which only happens once in a long while? And then like during the rest of the time, maybe it's not as good of an experience, or like what are your thoughts on that, I
Yeah,
guess?
it's a good question. I guess there are some pros and cons, again, looking back at the experience. So on the pro side, like I said, the training is just incredible. I still use some of the instincts that I gathered in those first 16 months of my career in this job now. Like when we look at companies that we want to acquire, I want to see their three statements. And I'll look at their balance sheet sometimes and I'll see some things that just instinctively I'm like, that seems weird. We should ask about that. And that's not normal training for most people who are doing kind of growth software, growth tech, M&A, right? You don't kind of think to poke holes into things that, or you may not even know that things look unusual. So
Yeah.
it's great to have that. One of the other pros that I would highlight that's really kind of time specific was if you go where things are really intense. At the time, restructuring was as intense as it's probably going to be in our careers. The formalities of the banking job, the suit and tie, the pomp and circumstance of pitching, a lot of those formalities go away, like by force. It certainly wasn't anyone's first choice to ship me out to Illinois to sit next to a CFO that we were advising, but there was just so much work to do that they had to do that. And when those formalities drop, you really just have a chance to be intellectually honest, to learn quickly, to ask questions, to say I don't know, and to get coached and to get mentored. And so um, I can't promise that in this environment right now that restructuring is going to lend itself to the same learning curve in the same time frame that I had back in 2008, 2009. So then I guess one of the cons would be if folks are interested in restructuring now, I would just be eyes wide open that it's a very specialized form of banking. I do think it's really relevant. I have immense respect for credit investors, for LevFin. Like, there's so much that they understand and that they dig into that I don't think all equity trained folks really think about.
Yeah.
And restructuring will teach you that, so that's great. At the same time, I came out of restructuring not really knowing how to answer simple questions about M&A because we
Mm,
just didn't do. We were so far from thinking about accretion dilution and what would make a business trade at a higher multiple if it was
yeah.
pro forma with another company. So there was a lot of other learning I had to do to pivot into Morgan Stanley when we went there. And I was really lucky, to be honest, that Morgan Stanley was kind of looking at me and saying, well, he's got a ton of training, but he has no idea how to do IPOs, how to do acquisitions, how to do follow ons. I was like really sharp on debt placements, but
Yeah.
that wasn't the bread and butter for Morgan Stanley. So I would say just go like you're lucky to get a job kind of anywhere in banking if you can get one. If you go into restructuring, just be eyes wide open and maybe take some time separately to practice or to train yourself on some of the areas that restructuring doesn't touch.
For sure. That makes sense. And I guess that's a good segue into kind of the next stop of your career that I wanted to ask you about, which is, obviously you were at Jefferies Restructuring for, it sounds like, a little over a year. Then you lateraled over to Morgan Stanley Tech. The same time when I lateraled to Morgan Stanley Tech, actually, I went over from DB Tech and you went over from Jefferies Restructuring. I guess a couple of questions there. One, what motivated the move, right? And like, why did you want to leave or make that switch? And then also, like, how did you come across the opportunity? Like, because I know how I came across it, but I'm curious how you heard about it. And for those in our audience who maybe are working at a bank right now, but maybe they're considering making a lateral switch, what advice do you have, I guess, for people who are going through that process?
Yeah. So at Jefferies I joined in summer 2008. By summer of 2009, you could look at kind of some of the charts now. The market environment was improving quite rapidly, actually, and unexpectedly. And so I started to kind of look around in the summer of 2009 at the work we were doing, and it wasn't the pace that we had, 9 months prior, 6 months prior. And so, at that time, I was doing well. We just had our first like annual review cycle, and everyone was kind of exhausted. But and in my mind, I was like, maybe I would be like a career restructuring banker. Like, I really respect the people I work with. I enjoy the kind of work I'm doing. But I
Yeah.
spoke to my mentors who had kind of coached me through all of my banking experience, and they were like, look, You got great experience, but if you are really interested in kind of buy side, if you're really interested in kind of other opportunities, I'd recommend that you go and get a more diversified banking experience. They knew, many of them were, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, et cetera. They knew that those banks were actually looking to hire because they were in those analyst classes, right?
Mm,
So in the summer of '09, some of those folks had said, "Hey, why don't you update your resume and I'll pass it along." And what better for a bank to hire than a already trained kind of person who's proven that they're good at this and can
yeah.
now go shift into the work that they need to do. And so I had friends at Morgan Stanley from Berkeley. Adam and Sukin was at Morgan Stanley before he going into private equity. We just had like so many people that we were lucky to know there. And
Yeah.
so when the opportunity came for them to look for laterals, it was kind of easy. And Adam, as an analyst there at the time, really kind of coached me through it. And Ed was
Mm,
there. We were lucky to have those people. But it wasn't an obvious transition for me. I thought I was doing really well at Jefferies. It was hard to think like, well, am I about to walk away from this even though I'm doing great, right?
right.
And I didn't know, like I hadn't really thought about M&A for the entire time I was at Jefferies. So I was a little bit nervous in those respects.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you have to like, you've built up so much goodwill and kind of just, I don't want to call it like political capital in the office. Like, it was the same thing when I left DB. Like my
Yeah,
first year, I was out of 5 people, I was the top bucket analyst. And so I was in a good spot. And, to leave and go to MS is like, I had to start all over and reestablish myself. And in some ways, that's an opportunity, but there's also, I guess, risks involved. Right. And yeah, I mean, similar to you, like I wasn't even thinking about lateraling at the time, to be honest. But Ed reached out and was just like, "Hey, we have an opening. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I am interested." Because obviously, MS Tech is if we're work. I was already in tech banking, and I know how often we would run up against them, and more often than not, they would win the deal over us. And so I just knew it was going to be like a better experience. But what I always tell people, because I have a lot of students now that try to lateral, and I always go back to that experience, which is one, I don't think that job was ever posted,
right, right.
like because they didn't need to post it. They had, I guess, 2 spots, right? Because it went to the two of us, but they had 2 spots at the time. They don't need hundreds and hundreds of candidates, especially if they know that all the candidates that they're going to be getting are one, people that are already vetted by their own team members internally already because they know us, and two, they already have experience at other banks. So you just don't need that many candidates. So like they didn't even post it. And so if you don't have a strong network from all of your previous networking efforts or even just people you're friends with from school, you probably won't even hear about the job. And then the second thing was like, I don't know how it was for you. For me, from the time Ed reached out, I think I had my first round phone interview with Owen, who was the staffer at
Yeah,
the
that's
time,
right.
either the same day or the next day. Like as soon as I agreed that I was interested, they talked to us right away. And then immediately at the end of that phone call, I was like, okay, you're coming in this coming weekend
Yeah, it was like
for
a
the
Sunday,
Super Day.
right?
The Saturday or Sunday, because probably because they knew we wouldn't be able to get out of office otherwise. And then that was it. Like the entire process was over in like a week, right?
Yeah, you're right. I
And so
hadn't
it's
thought
like
about
you
that,
blink,
but
you don't know about it, then you missed the opportunity already,
yeah,
right?
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I think like updated resume through accepting the offer was like maybe 8 days or maybe nine
Yeah.
days total. Yeah, yeah, you're right. It happened really fast. I do think, to your point, one of the recommendations is, banking is very intense. You could work a lot, and when you're not working, you don't want to have to think about work. But it is important to network. It's important to keep in touch with people. It's important to be looking around, not looking for jobs or looking to recruit, but just to understand how banking groups are doing, whether they're hiring or not. Those are really real indicators of how busy they are and if they're good places to go and learn.
Yeah. And I would encourage people just like, I mean, honestly, Ed and I we weren't really friends at Cal, but I think we just would always run into each other in the city after we graduated. Like we would go out on the weekends and run into each other. So we were kind of like social acquaintances.
Yeah,
And so, we're not even saying you have to network as in like, oh, go book a bunch of coffee chats or whatever, but it's just like put yourself out there, meet people, even in a social setting, especially people who work in other firms and whatever. Like you just never know when things will come. Like I was honestly kind of surprised that Ed reached out to me because it wasn't like we were super close or anything, but like that's what happened, right?
yeah,
And that I think that literally changed the trajectory of my career, right? So I'm really grateful for that. But
yeah.
yeah,
Same.
I
I
would say
mean,
Yeah.
Adam, I knew Adam very loosely when we were at Berkeley, and really, Sukin, who I've known very well for many years since college, was the one who was kind of encouraging me to explore the Morgan Stanley path. And then he kind of reintroduced me to Adam, and then Adam became a huge champion for me, even though he didn't really know me that well. And then we
Mm,
ended up living together, and now he's one of my best friends. So you're similar story. We're just lucky that people kind of knew us and sponsored us,
yeah.
and it ended up being an incredible career move.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Is he still at Excel KKR?
He is. He's living in London now. We're actually going to go see him in July. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow. That's awesome.
yeah,
Tell him I say hi when you see
I
him.
will. I will.
Maybe I gotta get him on this podcast.
You should. You should. I mean, he's been very successful, and he knows what it takes to be really good. So you should. I would encourage you to talk to everyone in our analyst class. It's fun to look back. Again, I haven't kept in
It
touch with
is.
them all, but they're all doing so well. Like
I
Ed
know.
and Art and Adam, they're all doing great. And so
I
and
know.
they all have different stories. Like Jason Lee, he wasn't in our class in Menlo Park, but I caught up with him a few weeks ago, and he's the CFO now.
Fair, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I worked with him at Square on the finance and strategy team after I did PE, and that guy is one of the smartest guys I've ever worked with.
yeah, he actually
Honestly,
did a podcast recently that I listened to, and I was like, man, like he's just so sharp. I worked with him at TPG when we were there together,
right?
and yeah, he's just very, very good.
I always we were on the same team, and I mean he joined before me, but when I first joined, we were still like the same level or title, whatever, I guess.
Yeah,
But I was just like, guy's way smarter than me. Like, what the hell? Like, and I was like, I mean, like, like obviously we've all done decently well by most people's standards, but it's like you still, when you're in these environments, you just always still meet people who are like, yeah, I'm definitely not the smartest guy in the room, which is great because you don't want to be the smartest guy in the room because that means you're probably not going to learn anything. But it's just like, I respect that guy a lot, man. And also, like, he's just such a nice guy.
yeah, he's so
Like
nice.
he's not like
Yeah,
cocky about it, He's not like, well, I'm the shit or whatever. He's just like random side note. Like I had my wedding in Hawaii,
yeah,
and so it was kind of destination wedding and you got to travel. And I invited some of my Square coworkers, and for various reasons, like none of them could make it. And then Jason, I guess Regina was pregnant at the time, maybe with their second child. And then so she couldn't travel. And then I was not expecting this at all, but he flew to Hawaii by himself just for like one day just to go to my wedding, and he went back. And I was just like so touched because I was like, damn, like you didn't have to do that,
yeah,
and I don't know if like I would have done the same, right? If I were in that situation, but I was just like, that's the kind of guy he is,
yeah.
and he's like super successful. And I'm sure that's a part of it, which is how you treat other people and whatever. And I think, anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, lots of
I
love for
think,
that guy.
I mean, as it relates to like advice for young people, I've been so lucky to have good mentors. So lucky.
Mm,
And they're all very nice people, and they're all very ambitious, and they're all much more successful than I am. And I just want to surround myself with only those kinds of people because they remind me that no matter how good things get, there's always more I could try and do, or there's always more I should think about. Jason's
yeah.
definitely on that list. I would also say, to your point on Jason coming to your wedding, like showing up is such a big part of it. Like Jason and I we actually hadn't caught up in like more than a year, I think.
Mm,
But every time we get together, it feels like we could have been in touch every week. He's very, very kind. He's very open. He's very honest. And so much of that, I think, is just making time and showing up. Like when I reach out to people that I seek advice from, I want to go see them in person. I don't want to just talk to them over the phone if I can find a way to see them.
yeah.
And I go to them. I tell them, like, they might be younger than me, they might be my age. I tell them, like, I will come to you and I'll try to meet you at your convenience.
Mm,
I just want to sit across the table with you and have a conversation. I think it means a lot to people when you show up. It enriches the relationship in ways that are hard to replicate. And they last even if you lose touch for a year or two or 15, right?
for sure. For sure. I mean, like him showing up to my wedding. I know this is not why he did it, but like him showing up to my wedding, now I feel like I am like indebted to him.
Yeah.
like like if he ever needs something, I'm almost certainly gonna say yes as long as it's something that I can help him with, right? Like, and again, that's not why he did it. He was just being a good friend. But again, that's just the kind of guy he is. I think that's great advice. So okay, we talked about MS. Obviously, after that, you did the very popular thing of moving to private equity, right? A lot of people, honestly, I think a lot of people go into banking just for the purpose of ending up in private equity, even, right? And so you got to TPG. Obviously, you had to go through on-cycle recruiting for that. On-cycle recruiting is notoriously competitive and just kind of a wild process where everything happens within like one weekend,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So can you talk about what that process was like for you? What was that experience like? Just kind of describe it for people who don't know what on-cycle is, I
Yeah,
guess.
sure. So first of all, I was interested in private equity when I was at Jefferies, and I could not get an interview anywhere. And so just to like make it very clear how impactful the Morgan Stanley transition was, like I got to Morgan Stanley in October. I think we joined in October of 2009. Within, I think it was less than 6 months later, I was getting like, pinged from the headhunters about every major mega fund private equity firm and their recruiting processes. And once one goes, they all goes. There's like a week where all of a sudden you're scheduling interviews at every possible place. I was very lucky that I was very lucky to get those interviews. They do screen out a lot of people. There were a lot of funds that declined to do a first interview with me,
Yeah.
even while we were at Morgan Stanley. I think the reason why TPG and several others were willing to interview was I had a good reviews from the people I was working with at Morgan Stanley. So, as you can imagine, all the partners in these private equity firms know all of the managing directors and kind of senior people at the banks. And so when
Right.
they're going through, it's still hundreds of resumes, I'm sure, across different banking groups. They're
Yeah.
calling and they're asking, who are your best analysts? Who do you like to work with? Who's really sharp. And I think when those calls were made on my resume, I was able to get in the interview process, so that helped a lot. So I would say, do a good job in your banking job, because that's going to be, your references are going to be a huge part of your success in getting a private equity job if you want one. And it was
Absolutely.
true. Like the senior folks at Morgan Stanley were so supportive in a way that I was very grateful for. And it
Yeah.
honestly, it made me want to work hard for them for the remaining year and a half that I was an analyst, because I just wanted to kind of show that I wasn't there to just kind of get a job and then phone it in. And then in the process itself, it was pretty intense. We did phone screens. It all kind of happens really fast. So you do phone screens, you get called in for interviews. The headhunters are scheduling flights for you if you want to go down to LA or go to New York. You have to be able to explain your story for the fund that's talking to you. So, I talked to credit funds, I talked to equity funds, and the credit funds were much more interested in my restructuring background, even though I was at Morgan
Right.
Stanley.
Right.
The equity funds were more interested in the software coverage that we had in tech at Morgan Stanley.
Yeah.
Ironically, I was doing a lot of work in like solar and in internet. Like I worked on the Facebook IPO. So you have to be very kind of conscious. And again, I talked to friends about how to make sure that I catered my responses and my experience to what that firm was looking for. The best way to do that is, in the middle of all the chaos, try to do mock interviews with friends in private equity, and
Mm.
let them poke holes in your resume, let them challenge you, ask them to get you to the point where you don't know how to answer. Because if you can get to that level of discomfort with someone you trust in a no risk environment, then you're going to be ready for that when it comes up in kind of the kind of very nerve-wracking suit and tie, interview process. And one of my friends was at Golden Gate Capital. He was actually the best man at my wedding. He was at Golden Gate Capital. I was interviewing at TPG. It was like similar. It was like a Sunday night, and we went through the first round of interviews, and then they said, "Go get something to eat, and we'll call you if we want you to come back." And so I called my friend at Golden Gate. He was working that Sunday, and I was like, "Hey, do you want to grab a bite to eat? I'd love to just like decompress." And so we went and got dinner together, and I was kind of sitting there staring at my phone, hoping that TPG would call back and have me come back. And fortunately, they did. And so I went back at like 11 p.m. on a Sunday night and did my final round interview. And then the next day, the head of the tech group called and said, we'd love to have you come work for us. So, it's really intense. I would say luck favors the prepared, right? In the midst of an intense banking job, lots of hours, lots of exhaustion, train and practice, practice LBO modeling, practice interviewing, get advice from your friends, because as soon as the bat signal goes up and everyone's interviewing, it happens really fast. And I'm sure I'm 15 years detached now, but I'm sure it's still the case now.
And the biggest difference between like the investment banking interview process and the private equity interview process, I'm assuming it was the same back then, but is that they actually put you through modeling tests,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Whereas like for banking is, you just verbally answering questions. They're not going to like, give you a laptop and make you build out a model from scratch or whatever. But for all the private equity firms, you pretty much are going to have to build some sort of LBO model, usually from scratch. And it's under time pressure. You have anywhere from maybe 1 to 4 hours, depending on how complex the model is. And so that a lot of times I think trips people up, especially those who aren't prepared. And I think back then, we had the luxury of actually being on the job for a few months before we had to do that. And so at least you were getting reps at work. But even the reps you're getting at work, you're using like templates and
Right.
you're just like, plugging in numbers. It's not the same thing as building from scratch. Right now, they're doing on cycle, just like banking. Everything moves up earlier. Now they're doing, I think last year they did on cycle in like June, like of
Wow.
your first year. So like you don't have time on the job yet, and you don't actually have live reps yet, except for maybe what you did over the summer. But during the summer when you're an intern, you're not really getting that many modeling reps anyway. So like you really have to prepare on your own, like, way ahead of time even. And I hear intense stories like, I mean, you getting to leave and grab dinner with your friend and then come back at 11 p.m. I hear now it's so competitive that like sometimes the firms will hold you there in the conference room and not let you leave because they don't want you to go interview with their competitors.
Right, right,
Uh,
right.
unless they cut you, then you can leave, right? It's just like such a crazy process, honestly, but obviously for good reason because it's extremely rewarding if you do get in. And so, like, what was that experience like at TPG? I guess
Yeah.
because like obviously you worked at MS. That's like probably one of the best groups you could have worked at for banking purposes, and then you go to TPG and you were still doing tech there, right? How was that different from say like doing tech banking? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's a totally different job. The financial modeling and kind of external company engagement aspects of it could be viewed as similar, but it's a very different job. So a few things that I would say. Number one, when I was interviewing for private equity jobs, every private equity firm has a reputation among all the analysts, right? Some are super intense. Some you're going to get crushed. You're going to work really hard. Some the people are really nice. And I would say just as you enter into that kind of chaos, don't believe everyone's view. It's important to gather views, but don't believe everyone's view. There were actually folks that I knew that were like, "Hey, even if you get this offer at TPG, just be careful because like it's a really intense place. It's really tough to work. Like the people are mean." That was not true at all. Like TPG had some of the nicest and smartest people I have ever worked with, and I was never like I never felt like I was mistreated or spoken down to. I was always treated with a ton of respect. I was
Yeah.
pushed. The people there are so good at what they do that
Yeah.
I was pushed to learn faster and to work harder and to get things done more quickly. TPG was just I really missed being inside the walls of that place because the people were very smart and very kind. And so that was just on the environment side. I was lucky to be there for the years I was there. As it relates to the work you're doing, it's very different. In banking, so much of your job is advisory. It's benchmarking. It's giving guidance to companies on how they might want to navigate a specific situation. It's very transactional in that sense. And at least in my younger years in banking, one of the things I look back on is when you're doing benchmarking and you're comparing different companies and you're giving advice on them, you're not going deep enough to really appreciate how different some of those businesses are. And that really
Mm,
started to become more clear when you go into the buy side and you really have to think about differences in business models and valuations, et
yeah.
cetera. So like the example I like to give is in banking, you would look at Qualcomm and Intel as comps, right? They're both chip makers. They both
Yeah.
have, they kind of fit into the industry categories, the sector coverage, et cetera. They are wildly different business models, right? Qualcomm, so much of its earnings are tied to royalties. That's not at all what Intel does. In private equity, you really start unpacking that. You really start saying, well, if I'm looking at this company and I'm thinking about the merits of acquiring it and owning it for the next 3 to 5 years, there's a bunch of work you do standalone. And then there's a bunch of competitive work that you do to understand how does it compete with, how does it compare to other peers in its space, and
Yeah.
the things that make them different, even if you believe they're very similar businesses, the things that make them different are really the parts you really want to get into because that's what determines whether it might be a good investment or it might be a terrible investment. So
Yeah.
the intensity of the work and the kind of work you do, I think, is much deeper and more intrusive in private equity than it is in banking. And the two things that I'll call out that TPG kind of trained all of us on, and I still use them today, are WRM, what really matters, and
Mm,
WYNTB, what you need to believe. So,
Mm,
and we use these at ServiceNow on my team. What really matters at the end of the day, you can learn how to do an LBO model, you can build the mechanics in Excel. What really matters is what is driving the business from a top line and cost perspective.
yes.
Part of your goal, even if you're studying the business top to bottom for, a month, is to really distill it down to what are the top 2 to 3, 3 to 5 things that really matter. If you can get those things right, you've de-risked, 80% of your 90% of your thesis. That's really hard to do. It sounds simple, right? Einstein said, if you don't know it, you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough, right?
Yep.
So simplifying things requires that you go really deep, but then that you come back up to the surface and you articulate what really matters. And
Yeah.
then you take that and you say, what do you need to believe, or what you need to believe in order for this to be a good investment? What
Mm,
needs to happen to those 2 or 3 or 5 levers that you've identified? And what are the key risks around that, right? Is the demand environment for the software business that you're acquiring into, is it changing? Are there competitive threats that could be existential for that business? How do enterprises adopt this? Are the sales cycles going to be impacted? What if there's something that changes in federal and you have a big kind of federal exposure, and then there's a lot of vertical software. So you're getting industry specific risk. Even if you're still investing in a software business, if you're doing it in oil and gas or energy, you're levered to the spending and investment cycles in that industry. It can feel really complicated, but so much of private equity is doing all of the work, doing 100% of the work because you're not sure which 5% is going to matter, and then figuring out which 5% matters and really leaning into that.
yeah. Oh man, that was so good. Hopefully everyone's taking notes because that's like you're getting inside the head of like how a real professional investor thinks about different investments, right? Yeah, I would say, just to kind of add a little bit to what you said, my own experience going from banking to PE was like it was a big adjustment because I feel like in banking, after a while, the job almost became easy because like not easy in terms of like the hours are obviously still long, but like you've done everything so many times. I've done comps, I've done M&A models, I've done DCFs. Like, after you do those things a couple times, you kind of know how to do them and you can do them with your eyes closed,
Yeah, that's right.
basically, right? And you get really fast at processing, and then you take orders from your MD or your VP or your director or whoever, and you just go and crank whatever you need to do, crank it out, and then you're just trying to get home.
Yes.
And that was like, in a way, it almost like, I'm not saying like this is what the best analysts are doing, but if you just wanted to get by, you don't really have to think that deeply, to be completely honest, about a lot of things you're doing. After like, I would say like maybe for the first 6 months, you're drinking from the fire hose, and the learning curve is super steep. After that, it kind of flattens out, right? Then I got to PE and it's like, man, you're constantly expected to have thoughts and opinions about whatever company it is you're evaluating. You can't just not really think about what you're doing. You actually have to, like a lot of the work that your MD was doing for you in banking, where they're actually thinking about like what should go on the slide and what are the points that we're trying to make, like they expect you to do that now as an associate in PE. And so if you weren't building that muscle back when you were an IB analyst and you were just kind of cruising, you're not going to suddenly just know how to do it. And then so there's almost like this adjustment period where in the beginning, you're probably not going to be very good,
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people, it's like, even though you could get by that way in banking, if your goal is to go to the buy side, you should start practicing those muscles while you're an analyst. And in a way, if you're doing that as an analyst in banking, you're almost like going above and beyond, as weird as that sounds. But like that's what's going to make you better at your next job when that's just like the normal expectation.
Yeah, that's
Right.
that's right. And maybe to put it very simply, when you're doing work in banking on a specific company, you're not asked the question, would you buy this company? You're not asked like, is this the best company to invest in at this price?
Yeah.
And that's like that was a flip that, even admittedly, I wish I had thought more in that way in banking to get ready for private equity, because I don't think I was good at that as fast as I needed to be when I got to TPG. And
Mm,
I learned a lot while I was at TPG. I learned a lot in the buy side post TPG, but I could have been better at that faster if I had taken, that mentality in banking.
yeah, for sure.
It's hard to, like you said, you're working a lot of hours, you're so preoccupied with just getting the work done and trying to get a few hours of sleep every night that it's hard to think through, what else should you be doing to advance your career, but it's really important.
Yeah, for sure. I wasn't going to ask about this, but because I didn't know, but since you mentioned this earlier, I kind of have to ask you about it. I forgot that you were the analyst on the Facebook IPO.
Yeah.
But I do remember at the time when we were at MS, that was like the big whale bake off. That was like the account that Michael Grimes, who, for people who don't know, is like one of the best tech bankers of our time and was the head of our group. That was like the account that we had to win at all costs. Right. And if I remember correctly, we even staffed. Did we have 2 analysts on that
every
account?
year we'd have a first year and second year on the account,
which is not normal because usually you just have 1 analyst. But this account has so much work on it that we put 2 analysts on it. And obviously, we eventually did win. We were lead left.
We were,
on that.
yeah.
And so we were the primary book runner, which is a huge win. And also, Michael is known for just being fanatical about, like, he will do literally anything necessary to win a deal. I mean, like anything legal, obviously, but like he will do anything. Like there's crazy stories about like him driving Uber, moonlighting as an Uber driver to win the Uber IPO, right? Or him being like one of the top players on, was it Farmville or Cafeville
Zynga,
or something to win the Zynga IPO. I don't know if he did. I know he was probably like on Facebook all the time using the product, but talk about that experience, like working with Michael so closely, and also like what it was like to work on really was still one of the most marquee tech IPOs of all time.
Yeah. So I was mainly focused on it in my second year as an analyst. And so at that point, I wasn't recruiting. I wasn't, I had already had my offer at TPG. So I was like, I could just do the job and not necessarily think about having to go find
that would have been not manageable.
That's probably right. So I was on it for my second year. It was really intense. When I look back, it was like a 7-year process for Michael Grimes to prepare for and win the Facebook IPO. He just knew that was what he had to do. So he was tracking every interaction he had with Facebook, with Mark, with Sheryl Sandberg. David Ebersman was the CFO at the time when I was working on the account. They had some really interesting problems, not problems, but like high class problems. They didn't need to raise capital by the time they came to go public because they were already generating cash. So interesting capital markets problems that most companies don't have to deal with. And if you remember, to your point on Zynga and others like LinkedIn, we worked on, as a team, as a group, Morgan Stanley worked on some really elite internet IPOs. To be honest, it felt like part of that was all just building up to making sure that we won the Facebook IPO.
Right.
And so we leveraged a bunch of the learnings from all of those to inform the work we did on Facebook. It was really intense. We worked on a ton of material for them. Every opportunity to connect with them, we were sharing information. Michael really wanted to be the trusted advisor that they picked up the phone and called when they had questions about how to deal with things. And he was, they meaning Sheryl and Mark and others, they would call him and ask him for advice on things that were totally not related to banking advisory, which was really unique. And having the opportunity to see that was really valuable for me because he really embraced his role as an advisor in all respects, not just like, hey, I want to win the Facebook IPO, I'm going to draft the prospectus in advance for you. He really wanted them to call him for whatever advice they needed. And he positioned it that way. And then all of the work we did was super fascinating. Like, I learned so much about capital markets mechanics, liquidity. How do you take a company public that doesn't need to raise capital? How do you tell that story? We actually did a credit facility that all the banks were clamoring over. Facebook ended up wanting to get a credit facility in place before their IPO. So we worked on that. I also, during that time, I built a model around, if you raise this much capital, here's how it can trickle out into the market and here's how you create float. And because I worked so intensely on that for so many weeks, I was actually taken to the meeting where they presented it to the CFO of Facebook, and I got to present a portion of it. And so those really special kind of rare opportunities are times to just like fully embrace the thing you're doing and how important it is. And I'll never forget, I was so nervous going into that meeting, but it was like a small conference room at the Facebook headquarters, but it was so cool. It was so cool to just be a part of that. And again, so much of what I learned on that, we spent a bunch of time on like Chinese internet names as benchmarks for, what was happening at Facebook. So much of what I learned is still relevant to things I work on now.
That is amazing that they let an analyst present at a meeting for such an important account, because I don't think that usually happens.
No.
Right. I mean, even at like smaller, less important meetings, analysts usually just carry the books, if you even get to go at all, and then you sit there and listen and take notes or whatever. So for them to let you present, one, you must have been an amazing analyst because they trusted you enough to do that. But also it says a lot about, I think, the senior team there, just, giving their younger team members the opportunity to learn and grow and kind of step up to the plate.
Yeah, totally. No, I was very lucky to do that. And the other thing I would say that I remember so distinctly from the way Michael worked was we probably spent 3 extra cycles on any deck that we were going to take into a meeting with Cheryl or Mark or David or any of the other pitches that we did with Michael. And what was I just remember so distinctly, I was in a meeting where I didn't say a word, I was just watching, but we would turn the page, we had these like 11 by 17 books, right? So we would like turn the big pages,
Yeah.
right? And I just remember there was like a 6 or 7 slide series where every time we would go through something on a page, the Facebook folks would ask a question and Michael would go, "If you turn to the next page, I'll answer that." And it was like boom, boom, boom. Like he was so good at not just organizing the information, thinking through how the conversation might go. He would like we would practice. We would like put the deck together. He would like go through it, present it, think through it, and then he'd be like, "Let's rearrange this. Let's change this chart so it looks more like this." Like he was so good at anticipating what they would think about and want to go to next, and then he would nail it on the next page. And it was just like, man, like the amount of it's not appreciated when you get there. Like when you get there, it's almost like a TED talk. It's like, wow, this is just like so good. But you don't appreciate how much extra prep it takes to do that. And I think about that now. Like we get in front of our executive leadership at ServiceNow when we're pitching acquisitions to them, and I think really hard as much as I can if I have time to do so. Like if I tell them this data point, if I go through this part of the thesis, what are they going to think about or what are they going to ask? And can I figure out how to anticipate that and either pre-answer it or put it on the next page or have it somewhere in the appendix like ready in case I have to jump to it? Right? Those little things really matter and are really hard to do right. And to observe that, to work on Facebook and to learn that stuff, I think has been very valuable for me career wise.
That's also why they trust him so much, because he anticipates all of their questions. He already knows what they're, thinking about
Yeah.
or what they're going to be worried about. And man, that's just like whenever you get the opportunity, I certainly didn't appreciate it at the time. I feel like, at least to the degree that I should have. When you get the opportunity to work around or for someone who is like considered one of the best at their craft, in whatever field it may be, like really try to watch them closely and see how they go about things, right? And behind every single one of these super successful people, like people just see like the success and, oh my God, they're, head of tech banking at, Morgan Stanley. Oh, they make so much money, this and that. But it's like the amount of, yes, you have to be like intelligent, of course, but it's not really, there are a lot of intelligent people out there.
Yes.
But it's like the amount of hard work and preparation that they put into their craft is what really sets them apart from other people. And like the attention to detail, and then also just like his willingness to go really above and beyond for his clients.
Yeah. When we were there, you may remember this, there was like a survey that came out and it was like top technology executives in Silicon Valley. And he was like number 2 or number 3 on that list. And everyone kind of looked at that and went like he was being compared to, like senior C-level executives at like HP or, Intel or other big tech companies. And it was like, how is this investment banker, on this list? And the reason, again, having now kind of grown up a little bit, the reason was he just took his role as an advisor so seriously that he was always ready. Like, I think this is so important. Being a trusted advisor is in part being ready to talk about whatever the client is wanting to talk about, is worried about, and being prepared and being able to say, yes, I've thought about that. Let me take you through, what I'm thinking about, and let me come back to you with more if I need to. And so I'm guessing that, again, like he probably was doing 100% of the thinking in order to be ready for whatever 5%, whatever 1%, Mark or Cheryl or David or any of his other clients were wanting to ask about. And as a result, he just was always prepared. And so why wouldn't they put his phone number in their phone and just put him in their favorites and say, when I need to talk to someone who I know is really thinking about this stuff for me, I'm just going to call him. And there's huge lessons in that. And he's obviously been very successful as a result.
And it's not easy because for Mark and for Cheryl, they are CEO and COO of Facebook. So that's all they have to think about.
Yes.
All day, every day, they're thinking about how to make Facebook better 24/7. For Michael, he has other clients and other accounts that he's also doing the same thing for, but at the same time, he has to be able to come up with insights that are actually useful or things that Mark and Cheryl haven't thought about themselves about their own business. It's like you having to know someone else's business just as well or sometimes better than they do is like, I don't even know how you do it, to be honest, as I'm saying that out loud. Like I don't even know how it's possible, but that's kind of what the best investment bankers have to do. And they definitely that's how they earn whatever they're worth,
Yeah.
you know? Like
I do think
it's
I do think to your point on, Michael like became an Uber driver when he went to pitch for the Uber IPO. That's kind of what it takes. If you really want to embrace understanding a business, understanding like what really matters, right? URM, what really matters. If you really want to do that as an investor, as an advisor, like go immerse yourself in what that business really is. Like I was,
yeah.
when I was at the hedge fund in Chicago, and then when I was at Waymo, I really wanted to know what kind of what the experience of a driver was for Uber and Lyft because we were, wanting to get into ride hailing with self-driving cars. And there
Mm,
was a period of time where I signed up to be a Lyft driver because I was
mm,
like, maybe what Michael was doing was really insightful. And like if I have the ability to say, here's how it works, here's my experience with it, here are the economics that actually flow through. I'm not just going to
yeah.
rely on what I read from public disclosures. Maybe I'll have more insights. Maybe I'll have more to say. And it was like it really. I think it's really valuable to do that.
Yeah, because most of his competitors are, let's say other managing directors making a ton of money, super busy, have a wife, have kids, like they're not spending their evenings doing something like driving Ubers, which most people will probably think like I'm too good for this. And so they're basing a lot of their insights on maybe equity research reports they're reading or just other people's thoughts and opinion. And none of that is like original thought, right? You're just rehashing what other people are thinking versus him driving Uber himself, he can come up with original thoughts of like, what needs to be done differently or what could be better or how the product could be improved. I was watching a interview from Tony Su, the CEO of DoorDash, and to this day, I think every DoorDash employee has to, I think maybe spend, I don't know, a day or a week or something out of the year delivering DoorDash,
Yeah.
right? Just every single person in the business, all the way up to Sisu. And that's just like, you just don't get the same level of insights if you're not actually using the product, right?
Yeah. Well, and speaking to like embracing the business that you're getting into, like Tony is a great example. He very intentionally went and worked at FedEx, right? In order to understand the complexity of a logistics business before
Mm.
building DoorDash. Like what a fascinating like
I didn't even know
instinct.
that.
Yeah, he like there was, a podcast where he talked about his background, and I'm pretty sure it was FedEx. I don't think it was UPS, but he went into the business and he was like, I wanted to understand how hard it really is to do logistics. And when you think about DoorDash, you're like, food delivery. But at the end of the day, that business is really logistics. It's really getting drivers to go pick up food, to drop off at somebody's place, and then to get the economics right. And so I think there's just so much there that I appreciate. And when you immerse yourself in some of these things, you really have it's important to separate signals from noise, but it's important to really acknowledge like you understand what the business really is, what it really does, what it's really selling, how it really works. Those things are
Yeah,
so important.
absolutely. Okay. Man, I could keep going,
Yeah.
but let's pivot over to kind of your hedge fund experience. So you go to JHL after TPG, right? I feel like PE and hedge funds, those are kind of like the two most sought after or common exit opportunities for banking analysts, right? So having done both, I feel like you have a unique perspective on kind of the similarities and differences between the two. I guess, can you talk about that a little bit? And also, why make the switch from TPG over to a hedge fund? And also, like, I know the fund that you were in, based on your LinkedIn profile, it was called Global Opportunistic Multi Strategy. So, like, what does that
Yeah,
mean?
what does that mean? Yeah. So toward the end of my time at TPG, I knew I wanted to go to business school, and I knew I wanted to go into the public markets. And that's a very
Mm,
normal kind of path that folks in private equity may choose. I think the main reason for me wanting to go into the public markets was as we worked on things at TPG, as we worked on names there were names that we did a ton of work on where I was like, I actually don't love this business. In fact, if we were able to bet bidirectionally, I would probably short this business. And we've now
mm,
done enough work to have conviction in a direction we think this is heading. And at that point in private equity, you put your pens down and you move on, right? Because private equity is long only, it's control, at least
mm.
in the strategy we were working on at TPG. And so, for me, technology investing required in my view that we needed to be flexible, and that it's hard to have 3 to 5 year views. I mean, think about how much the world has changed since ChatGPT launched, less than 3 years ago. So
I don't remember what that was like before ChatGPT, to
yeah,
be honest.
yeah, exactly. So things change really fast. And so 3 to 5 year kind of hold periods, you really have to have conviction in a durable asset. And that is something that private equity is very, very good at identifying. For me, I was interested in two-way investing. I was interested in kind of real time, higher velocity. That has its own challenges for sure, but that was the reason why I was interested in public markets. So I'll answer kind of what is global, opportunistic, multi-strat, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the differences structurally between the two. So
Yeah.
I was at Wharton doing my MBA, and then my girlfriend at the time, now wife, was in Chicago doing her residency in pediatrics. And so I promised her I would come to Chicago. So I only interviewed, or I tried to only focus on Chicago-based hedge funds. And I was very, very lucky. There was this fund I had never heard of called JHL. It's the initials of the guy who founded it, Jim Litinsky. Was very lucky that they were doing on-campus recruiting, interviewing at Wharton, and he was running a $2 billion hedge fund in Chicago with a small team. And his fund was a best ideas, willing to get concentrated portfolio. So what opportunistic means is we're not just going to have, kind of 60 names in the portfolio that are sized, differently, but they're all kind of in 2 or 3 sectors, and we're just going to run a portfolio of like software names, right? Opportunistic meant you could go anywhere, any company, any industry, and you're willing to get concentrated. And so from my perspective, that was a lot like private equity investing. That was very like, I want to know this name really well. I want it to be an asymmetric return opportunity, and I want to have a multi-year point of view. So best ideas, opportunistic is kind of what that means. Global, we could go anywhere. We could go to Europe, go to Asia. Like, he really had flexibility, and he was honestly, he was probably the smartest guy I've ever worked with. He had earned the credibility in building up a $2 billion fund to be able to go kind of have a point of view on foreign exchange rates in Southeast Asia, credit portfolios in Japan or in Europe. And then it's long short, so he could have a long or short view on credit or equity, so any asset class.
Yeah.
And what else? Global, opportunistic, long, short, multi-strategy. So any asset class. Multi-strat just means, you can invest in secured credit, unsecured credit, converts, equity, derivatives.
So basically, you guys just had like maximum flexibility with your mandate, basically.
We did. And again, this was all testament to just how, I mean, he was like a top decile fund performer during the downturn and had raised a ton of capital on the back of that. And with this concentrated strategy was very, very successful. And so I was really lucky. Like, I was really lucky. I got the internship. I got to work there for 14 weeks in 2014. One of the best pieces of advice I got from my mentor was build your own relationship with your PM. So, he would come to me and ask me to look at a certain name, and then people at the fund would have their biases about what they thought his view on it was or what his angle was. And so there was like a name I worked on when I was an intern where I was like, this is actually kind of interesting. I think I have a long view. And I would talk to people at the fund, and they were like, he came to you with an instinct that this would be a short opportunity. Like, maybe you shouldn't pitch a long to him. And my mentor was like, you got to have your own relationship. Like, you're there to build trust with your PM. So you should follow your gut. Don't just kind of do what you think he wants to hear. And so I did, and that we ended up building a great relationship on that basis. And so I went there and I worked there for 3 years, was very lucky to get a full-time offer, and grew into a managing director. And I basically covered kind of technology, software, internet for him. I also did, I ended up becoming more of a generalist. This is actually really unusual as you grow in your career. Usually, as in your career, you get more specialized. I got there to do kind of software, internet, tech. I, looked at semiconductors, like a lot of the stuff I was familiar with from banking and from TPG. And then he encouraged me and gave me rope to go learn about financial institutions. So by the end of my time there, I was covering banks in India, and I was like doing real estate investments in India, was looking at credits in Europe, and was looking at consumer retail in the US. And he was very open to me saying, he came to me once and he was like, can you look at, do you have a point of view on Fox as a media asset? And I was just like, and I felt very, this is again, credit to him. I felt very comfortable saying in that moment, I don't understand that business well enough to be able to give you an answer right now. And so he was like, that's totally fine. go do the work and come back. And, he was like, why don't you spend 4 hours on it and then come back with a point of view? And I was like, 4 hours is not enough time to understand Fox and a large media conglomerate. He was willing to push people to kind of do the focused work quickly, what really matters, and then to extend that. So, I worked on Qualcomm, and, it was like 4 hours, and then it was a week, and then I spent a month on it, and I went out to San Diego and met the executive team, all as part of my thesis building for that security. So it was a great.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, like, even though the fund itself is, global and multi-strategy, and you have, maximum flexibility as a fund, the people that are being hired in, I was going to ask, like, are you guys more specialists, or kind of like, do you have to be a jack of all trades? It sounds like for most people, you're supposed to go in and really specialize, especially as you move up, which makes sense because you got to be really, really, really good at like whatever it is that you're focused on, right? But it sounds like for you too, also, it's like learning how to learn.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you have 4 hours to dive into this new business that you know nothing about and then come back with your thoughts. Like, you have to know how to like learn and absorb new information quickly, and also like what to look for, and going back to what you said, it's like what really matters. Like, I'm sure you applied all those things in this role as well.
Yeah,
right?
it really compounded while I was there. I really felt like I grew up a lot in my 3 years at JHL. And I think it really hammered home for me that no matter how much time you have to look at something, you have to have a point of view. You will be like, you are just not useful if you don't have a point of view. And for the hedge fund, the objective was, are you interested in having a long or short position on this? And then we can figure out the structure of that position. But in every role that you have to have a view. You cannot just be there to provide information and let somebody else do the thinking, the hard thinking. And you're not going to be right. I'm rarely right the first time I develop a point of view. But the great thing about that job was we would look at 2 to 3 names a week, and we would really kind of turn things around. And then once we got to a point where we were like, hey, this is interesting, I want to spend more time on this, then we'd have freedom to go spend weeks or months on a single name, because it was really a best ideas place.
Yeah.
And we did private equity style work to the extent you can in the public market.
Yeah.
In terms of your initial question on differences between private equity and public markets, there are so many differences, but fundamentally, as an investor, as a thoughtful investor, you can distill some of the what really matters, what do you need to believe, what are the key levers that drive the business.
Yeah.
Understanding leadership styles, leadership instincts, what you think of the leadership team, and when put under pressure, have they thought through everything? That's really important on both sides. The styles of work are different. Private equity, you get full access to in a data room, and you're under NDA, and you get material non-public information. In the public markets, you're really trying to, it's like mosaic theory. You have to kind of stitch together all the possible information you can find, and then have a point of view and distill it down to signals versus noise.
I guess if I frame that question slightly differently, which is, I think for our audience, what would be most useful is if there's someone right now who's like very torn between the two paths, what questions should they be asking themselves to kind of like figure out which one is more like a better fit for them? Or is it like, if you're not sure, then I would do this first because that gives you more optionality, or, I don't know, like, how would you think about that decision?
Your second question, I think, is easier. I would do private equity first, for sure. Private equity is a longer duration, investment strategy and asset class. So going there, doing that training gives you a ton of relevance to public markets. I think it is hard. I don't know of a lot of examples of folks who've gone from the public markets back into private equity. So I would say from a directional standpoint, just like banking to private equity, I would go to private equity first. So I guess I'll make 2 comments on your first question. One, I've really loved every job I've had. Been very lucky to just have like great jobs with great people where I've learned a lot.
You've had like a bunch of really amazing jobs, honestly.
Yeah. And I had preferences, right? When I was in private equity, I was interested in public markets. When I was in public markets, I had a deep appreciation for how good of a business private equity is, right? It's like the grass is always greener. If you're sitting there and you're saying, I'm interested in private equity and in public markets, how do I decide which one I should go into? I think part of it is a velocity question and part of it is a temperament question. So in private equity, you're doing longer cycles of work, more detailed work. You're really getting into, a ton of detail on a business, and you have multiple rounds of diligence and so on to decide, and you're taking a long-term point of view. So the velocity is a lot slower, right? In public markets, things change every single day. And that can be a good thing if you're investing in things and you want to be able to change your mind or change your point of view as you see things in the market. There's also a lot of noise, but velocity will be very different. So that could be a preferential thing. And then temperament is the other. Public markets can be really stressful. You could be right about a thesis if you have a 12-month view, 24-month view, but you could just get pummeled on a day-to-day basis if Trump is doing things with tariffs, or if there's uncertainty in a certain aspect of macro, or there are just so many factors that impact stocks on a day-to-day basis that
that are out of your control.
that are out of your control, that are totally exogenous, that create sometimes opportunities for you to build positions in the public market. But you need to have a certain temperament. Whereas in private equity, I never felt stressed about, like, even when we'd look at public companies that we were looking to take private and they had a good quarter and they had good earnings, like, and the stock was up, I never felt stressed that we like missed something or didn't, because again, the duration was a lot longer. And so stylistically, I would say there's no bad decisions here, right? If you can get a job in one of the two, go for it.
Yeah.
But those are maybe some stylistic aspects that you could have preferences on. And then I would say if you totally ambivalent, you should just go to private equity first, because you'll always have optionality to go to the public.
Yeah. Longer duration, and because you control the business, you have a lot more levers you can pull to improve the performance and whatnot, right? Versus public markets investing, you don't control the business, and so they can do whatever they want and you might not know about it.
You do. Right? I would say, like, let's not overstate kind of, the controlling investor has a lot of influence on what happens in the business, but the majority, I would say, of private equity firms really still focus on acquiring and investing in very good leadership to make those decisions for the business, because the private equity firm may have hundreds of portfolio companies. And I would not claim to be, smart enough in my private equity roles to be like, well, I'm seeing the business not do X and Y and Z. I can just get in there and like roll up my sleeves and fix it, right? Yeah. I love being on the operator side now, but at the time that I was in private equity, I would not, I sat in the boardroom on companies. I wasn't smart enough to be somebody who could fix the business.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think a lot of times when I talk to students, the way most students think about, and this is understandable because they haven't been through it, so they don't have the level of insights that you would be able to have, which is why I wanted to ask you about it. But a lot of them just like, it's very simplistic. They're like, oh, in PE, you're working much longer hours than at a hedge fund. Like, you're working sometimes even like banking hours. So that job is probably like a lot more stressful. But in reality, you may be working longer hours or shorter hours at a hedge fund, but you're actually more stressed out because like you're not fully in control of how your picks are performing. And also, even when you're not working, you're probably still constantly on and following the news and what's going on in the markets. Yes. And what is Trump doing and all of these things. And so you're still kind of working regardless, is kind of what I've heard from my hedge fund friends.
That's right. Yeah. The intellectual intensity on the public market side is much higher, not necessarily because it's, you're doing harder work than private equity, but because there's so much more noise to filter, right? And when I was on the public side, I missed just like the clarity of being able to look at one company for a very intense targeted period of time under NDA. Yeah. With access to management to come to a view, as opposed to like the market just changes constantly. People are constantly publishing research. Earnings come out every 3 months. So many things can change on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for sure. I never recruited for a hedge fund and I never worked at a hedge fund, but for people who are interested in recruiting for hedge fund jobs, I feel like one big difference that I notice is for investment banking and private equity, I feel like the process is a lot more similar from firm to firm, right? And so there's a lot more resources available out there in terms of like, these are the questions you should expect, or like if you're interviewing for PE, like you got to know how to build the LBO model, right? And so it almost makes it, I feel like, easier. And it's also probably why there's a lot more resources out there. Whereas for hedge funds, I feel like there's so many different strategies and there's just not like this uniform way to go about preparing for it. So like, how did you prepare for those interviews? And also like for people who want to go down the hedge fund path, like how do you prepare yourself, or what are some things you can do? And even like when I try to look up some of these hedge funds, like I go to their website and there's like no information. Nothing, yeah. It's like, you can log in if you're an investor. Otherwise, like it's literally just like the name of the firm and that's it. Right? Yeah. So like, how did you go about kind of preparing for those interviews?
So when I was at Wharton, I interviewed for summer internships at hedge funds, and then obviously was lucky to get a full-time offer, so I didn't have to go through the full-time recruiting process. But I got coached at Wharton on, what does it take to get through hedge fund interviewing, and there were a lot of folks at Wharton that either came from the public markets or were trying to get into it. So there was good coaching there. A
Mm.
big part of it is explaining your background as you would in any role. And then a really big part of it is what are your ideas? So in hedge fund interviews, you're asked to pitch what stock ideas do you have? What sectors do you like? Certain funds might ask you about macro. Not a lot of every single hedge fund interview I had, they wanted me to pitch one, two, three ideas, long or short. If you're interviewing at a long only fund, don't take short ideas in, right? Focus on your long ideas. Certain funds had duration points of view. So they would want to know if you had a 3 month view or a 6 month view versus if you had a 1 to 2 year view. So it was actually really hard to work on even two, three, four ideas, stock ideas, long and short, and then be ready to kind of talk about them intensely and in detail in any interview. But that's very much a part of the process. So you just have to be ready for that. And again, very similar to other types of processes where you have to practice with your friends. Like practice. Like I could get on the phone with you and you could just like I could just tell you beforehand, like hammer me on pitching you a stock and convincing you that it's the most brilliant idea. And then you could just attack me in a mock interview on what's your idea? What about this? Like, are you worried about that? I'm Googling this right now and I see that this is like, a bear case, or I just, asked for the bear case on ChatGPT. Tell me why the bear case doesn't make sense. Like what's the catalyst? What's going to cause investors to go the way that you think the stock is going to go? How do you think about this relative to other things in its sector? Why is this the best risk reward? Like all of that stuff. It's really hard to prepare for all of that, but that's what it takes when you go into hedge fund interviewing.
But it seems like one of the first steps, though, to do that effectively is you do have to be able to at least know a little bit about the fund's strategy
Yeah.
or how they like to invest. And so, are you able to just find that information online, or like,
So
do they tell you
13Fs.
beforehand?
Yeah. So
They're
So funds file 13Fs, usually, I think 90 days after the end of the quarter. So you're able to see what's in their portfolio. So if you're interviewing at a fund or if you're interested in a fund and you notice that like all of their investments are in software and internet, don't go in there and pitch a consumer retail stock, right? Like
yeah.
that's kind of obvious. And then talk to people. The hedge fund community, as big as it might seem, is quite small.
Mm.
If you've worked at a few hedge funds, and I have friends that have, they know most people at most funds, and they could either help you find someone who is familiar with or used to work at a fund that you're interested in. So those are good ways to learn more. Also, just look at the founders. Like you search for a fund, you can find the people that work there on LinkedIn and you can look at their backgrounds. And it would not be surprising to you if you saw a guy who worked in private equity or worked in public markets and covered software and is now the portfolio manager and head of a fund. That person's probably got a bias towards software because they've been doing that for a lot of their career. There are ways to kind of fish through the information and see what's
No,
useful.
that's really good advice. Yeah. So basically, get resourceful, piece it together from publicly available information if it's not available on their website. And then from there, you really have to have a point of view.
Yes.
And also be able to defend it, not just like surface level stuff, but they're going to really grill you and drill down like multiple levels and double click on stuff. And you just have to be prepared for that. And that requires you to get a lot of practice reps in before you do the real thing.
Yeah.
Basically.
And by the way, that same prep also prepares you to ask questions and be thoughtful in the interview process, right? Like hedge fund people, I consider myself a buy side thinker. Like we really like talking about companies. We really like talking about positions. We really like talking about, the obviously the winners, but even some of the ones that we learned a lot from that we lost money on, ask those questions. And, you have rare opportunities in hedge fund interview processes to meet people who are really good at this and have clearly built a career around it. If you're not ready to ask them questions like that, you're missing a chance to show them that you're really curious and intellectually excited to do that kind of work.
Yeah. I feel like if this is not something you're genuinely passionate about, it's really hard to fake it.
Yes.
To the degree that's necessary to actually land one of these jobs. Like if you're not normally interested in analyzing businesses and investing and not like, gambling, but like actually investing and, looking at it from like an investor's point of view, whether you should invest in a company or not, having a long thesis, short thesis, and having good reasons why, then it's probably not the right job for you anyway.
Yeah, right? That's right. The 3 years I had in Chicago, my wife would tell you this. It was really hard for me to not think about the names that I was studying on the weekends and the evenings. And my wife still teases me now. I love just
Hey, Vishal, pay attention to me.
yeah, exactly. Like, no, she like even now, my friends, my wife, like everyone knows, like all I like doing is talking about work because I'm really interested in what I'm doing, really interested in what I'm spending time on. And there is some value, I think, in just being fully obsessed, and probably unhealthily so, in what you're spending time on.
No, I joke about it because we've all gotten that from our wives. It's
Yes.
like I'm just like zoned out thinking about my work, and then like, "Hey, are you there?"
Yeah.
Like,
Right. Right.
"Oh, sorry."
I mean, I would also come, my wife was in residency and then fellowship while we were in Chicago, and I would come home and I'd be like, "Can I practice pitching you like Qualcomm stock?" And so she could probably explain to you Qualcomm's business model, not because she wants to or she's interested, but because like I forced her to help me prepare for how to think through that when I was working on it. So
That's real. That's real love,
yeah,
man.
that's real.
Okay, so then you go in tech, right? You leave the buy side.
Yeah.
You go do corp dev at Waymo. Corp dev also a very popular exit for bankers, I would say. But I feel like usually people do like one or the other. Like they either choose the buy side route or they choose the corp dev route, and I feel like they're very different. But like, why the switch to corp dev at the time? And then a follow up question to that is like, there's plenty of companies you could have done corp dev for, right? And like when I switched from PE to tech, I didn't do corp dev, but I went in finance and strategy with Jason, and I feel like at the time, like one of the most important decisions was like picking the right company.
Yes.
Especially if you're going to go work in tech, like it's all about picking the right company, right? Because you're going to spend at least several years of your life there. And just like as an investor, you're investing your money into a stock, but like with this,
Your
you're also
career.
investing your time
Yes.
and your career, which is like even more valuable than your money. Because money, if you lose money, you can make it back, whatever. With your time and your career, like you don't get that back
Yeah.
if you make the wrong pick. So like walk us through that decision making process. Like, why did you pick Waymo, and then also like why corp dev?
Yeah. So this was a really hard transition for me because I loved the buy side and I loved the job I had in Chicago. I'd gotten promoted to managing director in 2018, in January when I was there, and I loved the people at JHL, loved the PM. Was so lucky to have the chance to work around that quality and talent.
Yeah,
It was this is where life starts to become a part of decision making, not just career. So my wife and
yeah.
I were expecting our first kid in 2018. She was due in August, and at the time my wife was finishing fellowship in allergy and immunology, and so she was entering the point where she would have to go find a job, and for doctors, like, there's a lot less turnover. It's not like she's going to change jobs every 2 to 3 years. So
Right.
where she established herself in private practice and then grows her career could be where she is long term. And we bought a condo in Chicago. We wanted to stay there. As we thought about it more, also, like, both of our families are in California. My sister ended up settling down in San Diego. One of my other sisters on the East Coast. And so we had this, I just remember so distinctly this conversation where we were talking about how we were expecting a kid. We wanted to be closer to my wife's parents. And we were like,
Mm,
maybe this is actually the right moment to go to California and just settle down career wise there. And we agreed that we would kind of test the market. And if one of us got a great job opportunity, then we would move. And so, of course, my wife, being very talented, got an offer almost immediately from like a really good private practice in San Francisco,
yeah,
which is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it was great because all of a sudden we now had like a less risky path to coming back to California. But then it
yeah,
put me in a position where I was like, okay, I need to go find a job there now. And again, very lucky that I had conversations with my PM about it. He was really supportive. He offered to be a reference, and he just didn't want to have a remote team. So he didn't want me to kind of work for him from California, even though I offered to do that.
yeah.
And so he was very supportive of me recruiting to find something. This was probably the most stressful kind of transition I've ever had in my career because I was going away from the buy side. And I tried. I
Yeah.
interviewed at Citadel, I interviewed at Millennium, I interviewed at other public hedge funds, I interviewed in private equity, I interviewed in growth equity, I interviewed in venture. Like, I really wanted to stay on the buy side. And in the spring of 2018, it was not a great time to be interviewing and recruiting for jobs. And I wasn't a perfect fit for every one of those jobs.
What was happening back then?
So in the spring of 2018, job market for buy side was a little bit tighter. Like, there weren't a lot of
Mm,
kind of seats. And if you were in the public markets, this was when Thang and what's now the Magnificent Seven really started to take a disproportionate share of kind of the market returns, or alpha. And so
yeah.
you were basically an underperforming fund if you were not levered to like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Netflix, Amazon,
Yeah.
right? And then this was
Yeah.
like pre-Tesla. I guess Tesla had started taking off at that point, but pre-Nvidia. So there weren't a lot of seats. The ones that were available were very competitive. I remember like I interviewed for a role, a more senior guy I had overlapped with at TPG ended up getting that job, and I was like, you know what? If I'm going to lose that job, I fully understand and respect that that guy is way smarter than me, more experienced than me. So small community. But anyway, to answer your question, I realized a few months into the process that I needed to start thinking about maybe not having a buy side gig. And then the question was, what do you go do? And so I ended up getting on the phone with people in my network who had transitioned from finance to corporate. And
Mm.
I talked to anyone I could. So I talked to people I even talked to people who had never done finance. I was like, I'm going to send you my resume. You're a friend of mine. I trust you. Tell me what you think of the resume you just received. If I was trying to get a
Mm.
job at Facebook, right? And this is a woman that worked at Facebook. She's one of my wife's best friends, and she had been there since college. So she was like, first of all, Vishal, I have no idea what your resume is. Like, I have no idea what Morgan Stanley does. I assume that you were like a teller at a bank. I have no idea what TPG is. I have no idea what JHL is. Like, I don't understand any of this. Like, and I read all the words in here, and like half of them are finance words that I just don't like. And she was doing product at Facebook. So that
So
was
funny.
enlightening for me because I was like, okay, if I want to get into corporate, I really need to acknowledge that I'm not interviewing with people who deeply understand the finance world, the buy side world, the way I do. I also
Yeah.
talked to Jason Lee, and I talked to a friend of mine who worked at Google and then went to a hedge fund. I talked to a bunch of different people, and I basically like kind of asked them to interview me as a kind of a mock interview process to understand what angles they would come at me with. And then finally, I took the philosophy of I would only go work somewhere if I would invest in that company. So I took a very like hedge fundy, buy side approach to it. I was like, I think if I want to be part of an early high growth trajectory, like why didn't I just go work at Google after college and stay there forever, right? Or why didn't I go work at Amazon? Could I find the 2.0? And so I laid out a bunch of different things that we were looking at J. I kind of picked, and I was like, I'm not just going to pick sectors, I'm going to pick winners in sectors. So, who knows? With the benefit of hindsight, some of these were right, some of these were wrong, but I was like, fintech is really interesting. I'm going to go. I'm going to go pursue a role at SoFi. Anthony Noto had just left Twitter and became the CEO at SoFi. There was a chief of staff role for him. I interviewed for that. So that was one. I was interested in autonomous vehicles. They were kind of making a ton of noise. GM and Ford and Google were all investing in that. And so I was like, I'm interested in autonomous vehicles. Maybe this is the 2.0 scaled opportunity, and Waymo I think is going to be the winner, so I want to go interview there. Over the top video I dropped for a role at Roku. Unity in gaming, and then
Mm.
crypto was really interesting, so I interviewed at Coinbase, and I used kind of folks in my network, including a guy from TPG, to help me get
Yeah.
an interview at Coinbase. And then what I learned from my friends in corporate was the most natural fit for my skill set was corp dev. I could try and get a job in finance, but even then, like, I had a buy side mind. I had experience doing acquisitions. The most natural kind of place for my resume to go is corp dev, and so I focused almost exclusively on corp dev roles, except for that chief of staff role for Anthony Noto. And so that was how I approached it. And I interviewed at Coinbase, interviewed at SoFi, interviewed at Waymo, and I just got really lucky that the woman at Waymo who was building out corp dev had
Yeah.
a private equity background. She's actually, I mean, she's an incredible career story. She's now the CFO at Ford Motor Company,
Wow.
and so she's a she's an incredible mentor. But she had a private equity background. She kind of had an appreciation for my experience in public markets. And then, unbeknownst to me, when I was interviewing at Waymo, they were also thinking about someone who could help them do external fundraising because at the time Google was starting to spin out the other bets and make them more independent, and Waymo was kind of next in line for that. So when I interviewed with the CFO, interviewed with the head of legal, they were asking a lot of questions about capital markets and fundraising stuff that I was kind of like, I know how to talk about this, but that's not what I was expecting to spend time on. I
Yeah.
thought I was going to do like software M&A here. And they were like, well, turns out we need you to do both. So I went to Waymo, spent 2.5 years there doing uh, basically 50% of my time on fundraising and led their Series A with my boss, and
Yeah.
then half my time on software M&A.
So basically, the way you kind of went about it is one, taking a not public, but buy side investors approach to almost like picking investments that you would want to make as an investor. Like these are companies I would want to put my own money into
Yes.
if I could, which I think like I 1,000% agree with that. That was also how I kind of went about it when I was looking to pivot to tech for, the reasons we already mentioned before. Like you're investing not just your money, but your time, like your most valuable currency.
Yes.
Right. But then the other thing is really tapping into your network to just see kind of like, what opportunities other people knew about and what interesting companies are out there. And then just kind of doing your due diligence on like the short list of companies that you came up with, and then just seeing which one works out, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Like anything that's on that list, you would have been happy to get the position at. But it's not. The thing I want to call out is I think a lot of people, when they apply for jobs, they take this like spray and pray approach. It's just like, oh, like these are all the jobs I see on LinkedIn, so like let me go and like just apply. That's not like a really good way to go about it, in my opinion, right? It's like you should first come up with a list of companies that you find interesting or that you would bet on, and then see if there is like a position available at that company that would fit what you can offer.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes there will be, sometimes there won't be. And if there won't be, then, obviously you got to take them off your list, at least for now.
Right?
I
mean, on that point, I would say if you identify a company that you want to be a part of and that you would bet on and that you're willing to kind of focus your career and your time and attention on for the near term, the role should actually matter a little less. It's, this is such like an old man thing to say, I feel like, but when I was at Wharton, people were, the people who had graduated were like, don't worry about what classes you take. Pick the best professors. And go learn from them, whatever they're teaching. Just go pick the best professors. And there's kind of an analogous approach to what you're saying. So much of your career and your success will be tied to the business that you work for. If I go and I do an incredible job at a company and the company fails or just totally winds down and goes bankrupt,
yes,
like when I go out and interview again, that's part of my reputation now, right? That's part of what people view me as, right? That's part of my brand. Like I would actually, I struggle a lot with this, when I coach people. Like I focused on corp dev because it was where I could transition from buy side to corporate the most effectively. But in reality, I think it's really powerful if you go into a company and you say, I am here because I want to work for this company. Here is my skill set. I've mapped it to this role that you have available, and here's where I think I could add. Here's where I think I have some deficiencies or things that don't totally fit that I believe I can learn from or learn into, grow into. And then it's also really powerful to say, I'm not just here because I want to be in AI. I'm here because I want to work at what I think is the category winner in AI, or I'm here because I think this is the best company in this category. So when I went to Waymo, I was like, I went out of my way to say, I'm not interviewing at GM. I'm not Cruise. I'm not interviewing at Argo. I'm not interviewing at Aurora. I'm not trying to get a job at Tesla. I'm only here because I'm betting on Waymo. And I think people appreciated that because it showed that I wasn't just like a spray and pray candidate, right? I had a point of view.
No, that is so true. I found that to be true in my own experience as well. Is when I pivoted to tech, obviously I joined Square. I really studied Square at the time. And I was like, what do I think about this business? And I was like, at the time, I think it was worth like $3 billion in private valuation. And I was like, I think this business is going to be worth way more. Honestly, regardless of whether I joined Square or not, it was going to do what it was going to do.
Yes.
Right. Like if it was going to become a huge company, it wasn't because I joined that it became this huge business. Right. And then I went to GitHub, same thing, like $750 million private valuation when I joined. Now, obviously got acquired by Microsoft for $7.5 billion, but like, now it's worth way more than that.
Yeah.
Same thing. It was going to do whatever it was going to do. The product was so good. It wasn't like I was like this huge needle mover or whatever, right? I like to say I contributed a little bit, but you know what I mean? And then I joined the company after GitHub, and that was called Enjoy Technology. And that company ended up going public through SPAC, but then went out of business. It was trying to do like a similar like DoorDash. Logistics model is actually extremely tough.
Really hard.
But they have some fundamental flaws in that business model that's different from DoorDash. I kind of saw the writing on the wall when I was there because I'm in finance. I'm building the models. I'm looking at I'm like, this can't work, right? And so I kind of eventually left that to obviously do Wall Street Mastermind. But my point is like Enjoy was going to go out of business regardless of what I did there as well. And so coming back to your point though, even though it's not really fair, for better or for worse, like people do associate like the success or the failure of the company with your success or your failure.
That's
like
right.
They give you too much credit when the company you work for was really successful, and they give you, they count it against you too much when it goes out of business, right? And so I always tell my students, like, especially the ones who are, thinking about going to tech, like sometimes people are like, I'm gonna go join that like seed stage or series. It's like, yes, you could be like the fifth guy at the next Facebook or Amazon, but chances are 99.99% chance you're not going to be at the next Facebook or Amazon, because that's like one in like whatever, a million companies,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And so even when I joined Square and when I joined GitHub, I personally felt like the sweet spot is both of these companies already have super strong product market fit. You knew that they could be the category winner in their space. And at that point, it's more about like scaling the business and, it's like, kind of that growth equity phase, I want to call it, is like it's scaling the go to market. And that's also, by the way, like for people like us who are coming from a finance background, like they don't really need people like us when they're like seed stage or series A anyway. They kind of have more of a use for our skill set when they're in that growth phase and they're trying to scale. And like, because they already have product market fit, it's been de-risked a good amount, but I'm not saying it's for sure going to be a home run. Obviously, and you're not going to make as much money as if you were like the 10th engineer at, Facebook, but you can still have pretty significant life-changing upside, if I had stayed at Square long enough or GitHub longer, like, I honestly left a lot of money on the table.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of like how I think about it. And again, and a lot of it is, I think that's the other thing about starting your career in banking and on the buy side is like you learn how to evaluate businesses from an investor's point of view
Yes.
and think about their valuation. And that is just like a super valuable life skill, not just for like your personal investing in your stock portfolio or whatever, but also for like picking jobs and picking companies and who you want to bet your career on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. And
right.
I feel like that's something that people don't talk about.
I mean, there's also like, just I guess related to that, when I think about like learnings from the buy side that have helped me make decisions on transitions to corporate, like sector and industry matter a lot.
Mm.
Don't miss the forest from the trees. Like you could pick a winner in a category that's not trending in the right direction. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's the winner in that category. If the whole
Yes.
sector is declining or struggling or at risk of going away, then whether you're at the
Like,
best
do you want to go
company.
work in AI right now, or do you want to work for like a newspaper?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then the second thing is, it's hard to know for sure what the winners are going to be, who the winners are going to be, but
Yeah.
you want to you want to get to a place where you have a narrative or you have a thesis that you can test when you get there, right? Like I had a point of view on Waymo when I got there, and I was still in my mind as I was starting to work there, calibrating what my thesis was relative to, coming in. And that was really interesting for me because it does allow me to discern to an extent the is this business still what I thought it was when I was excited about it, or are there things that I'm now seeing that make me more or less excited? And those businesses change all the time, change on a day-to-day basis. ServiceNow does too. So it's important to maintain that. Don't just like, I've made it, now I'm here, now I can just not think about it anymore. It's a constant
Right.
thought process.
For sure. Speaking of ServiceNow, obviously, so you lead corp dev there now. You also, are involved with their venture arm, right? And I actually wasn't aware of this, but when I was preparing for this interview, and I saw, oh, ServiceNow has a venture arm, and I started doing some research on that, and I was like, oh, actually, a lot of the huge enterprise software companies out there all have their own venture arms, like Microsoft and Google and Oracle and SAP and Workday, like all these companies, right?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so I guess a couple questions on that piece, which I find interesting, which is like, what is the strategic value for the parent company to have a venture arm like this? And then the second thing is like, I don't know if there's a big difference or maybe not that much of a difference between working in corporate venture versus like more of a traditional venture capital firm. Like, obviously you haven't done like traditional VC, but just based on what like how does that affect kind of your day to day or maybe like how you make decisions, I
Yeah.
guess?
There's a lot to unpack there on like difference between traditional VC and corporate VC. I guess the quick answer to that, and then I'll answer the first part, is corporate VC we are a strategic. We are out in the market, we're competing, we're selling software, and we have spaces that we play in, compete in, et cetera. So by nature, startup companies, early stage companies that could be relevant to us, could be adjacent to us, could compete with us, they're conscious that we are a role player in their market. We're not just a financial institution that's looking to invest capital and grow.
Yeah.
And so it's a more complicated conversation. That early stage company wants to know, if they're going to let us invest, what does that mean? Does that mean that maybe we might acquire them in the future? Maybe we might compete with them in the future and we want to keep tabs on them?
Yeah.
They want to know some of those things, and they treat strategics, I think, as a category differently from the way they treat just pure financial VC investors. So it's important to be eyes wide open about that when you get into that. And you're right, a lot of software companies have kind of a VC arm. As it relates to corp dev, so ServiceNow, again, really, I've been very fortunate to have come here, to have been here for, this is the longest I've been at any one job now, over 4 years. And ServiceNow has been incredible. So our team in corporate development has a bit of a broader mandate. We do acquisitions, obviously. We do execution of venture investments. We have a kind of a sister team that has an incredibly talented group that helps with sourcing, executing, and portfolio monitoring and reporting. So we have a ventures development team. My team does product focused partnerships. So I have folks that are kind of specialized in that area, and they map to all of the different product areas that we have at ServiceNow. And then I also oversee the acquisition integration team, or integration management office. And that's a few people that help take the ball after we close acquisitions and make sure that they're integrated properly. So, the thing that I kind of had this view 4 years ago, and I still think it's not totally appreciated. ServiceNow, my simple philosophy on it is, it's very hard to find a major trend in enterprise software that does not intersect some part of ServiceNow's business. ServiceNow is, over 10 billion of top line. We sell into 5+ major buying centers in large enterprise. We have, I think our CFO commented, 12 or more products with over 250 million of CACV. This is not kind of a monolithic single product scaling to the moon, company. This is many products, many buying centers, IT, HR, customer, ERP and finance and supply chain. Like, we do many, many things. And so what's exciting about that for my team is we are a very large single company who can be a large player in all of these different categories. And we organize my team to cover all of those different categories from a domain standpoint, from an acquisition standpoint, and obviously from an investment and partnership standpoint. The reason why that's beneficial to our venture strategy is, we might go invest in emerging technologies that are going to impact the HR software space or HCM space. We might invest in early stage companies that are relevant to aspects or ambitions that we might have in the future in the customer value chain. Obviously, we're very big in the CIO and IT organizations. We can invest in emerging technologies that are adjacent there. And that gives us an incredible amount of visibility, of insight, and honestly, it keeps us sharp on the latest things that are happening in those areas that do impact and benefit both our competitive and strategic position, but also our acquisition strategy. So it really build, buy, partner, invest. We look at everything through that lens. And I love that our team is kind of organized that way, organized by domain, and that we can really be sharp on that. But it is a lot of work, right? I have arguably a large team in traditional corporate development, but because of how many different places we touch within large enterprise software, it feels like there's a never-ending amount of work we could be doing in any one of those areas.
Yeah. I was going to ask, I don't know how many employees ServiceNow has now, because obviously you guys are a huge business. And then how big is the corp dev and corporate ventures team specifically? And then also what, for students who maybe are interested in working, say, in corporate ventures one day, or even in corp dev, what type of background or experiences are you guys typically looking for? Are you guys primarily hiring former tech bankers, or former venture capital associates, or what do you guys typically do, I guess?
Yeah, good questions. So a few things. We have, I think, now 27,000 employees as a company. In the last 4 years since I joined, we've grown from, I think, kind of 4 billion of run rate subscription software revenue to 12 billion of run rate in our latest quarter, which was reported earlier this week.
So you guys got a nice pop.
We're an execution machine, and our CEO and our leadership talk about that, and that's been great. We also, I kind of, when we talk about kind of the domains and in the areas we cover, AI is kind of a huge part of our platform that goes into everything that we sell in every buying center. So it's, we have kind of an interesting architecture. Speaking of Intel and Qualcomm could be comps in the market, but how different are they as businesses? We could be comped to Salesforce or Workday or others, but we are so different, just architecturally, top to bottom, despite the fact that we deliver and sell traditional SaaS, right? So it's important to unpack some of that stuff when you think about these businesses, and that's an exciting thing for us. That's creating a lot of opportunity for innovation and differentiation for us. As it relates to your question on like how do you think about if you're an emerging kind of interested in corp dev type person, what do we look for? We do look for, I think, traditional backgrounds, banking, private equity, consulting. A lot of the corp dev job is about going and sourcing externally, meeting companies, understanding what companies do, mapping competitive landscapes, advising our internal leadership on, does this acquisition opportunity solve some of the things you're looking for? Does it help accelerate us opportunistically in certain areas? So all of that work finds its foundations in the training that you get in investment banking and private equity, especially in software. And I do think it's helpful when we go and recruit, and we have the good fortune of having lots of candidates when we do interview and recruit. It's helpful when folks have software in their domain experience, because it's just harder to train someone who maybe was doing a completely different industry to just understand the mechanics of software, how you model software, etc. So that's important. And then I would say, this is my like shameless pitch. I think ServiceNow corporate development is the best place across all of technology to be doing corp dev. And it's because we do acquisitions, we do investments, we do partnerships, we engage with customers. I spend time with customers all the time. I'm going to be at our customer conference in 2 weeks. We get to think about many different buying centers in large enterprise, not just kind of a single category. We're at the middle of the big transition to AI, and you get kind of a rich experience across all of these different things that you'll work really hard, you'll spend time on things, you'll look at something and say, would I acquire this but not invest? Would I invest but not acquire? Should we just partner first and explore? Should ServiceNow be a customer of that technology? We have so many different kind of ways in which we can look at these businesses, and there's no good formula for like what does it mean to grow your career in corp dev, but I can promise you that after a year in corp dev here, you will have worked on so many different kinds of transactions, and you will have looked at so many different kinds of software companies within enterprise software, that your diversity of experience will be leverageable if you want to go into VC, if you want to go into another corp dev role, if you want to go into partnerships and alliances, which creates a ton of value for large software platforms. I think there's just endless opportunity. And then on top of all of that, I was at Waymo where we were burning a lot of cash and I was helping fundraise. ServiceNow has the opposite problem. We generate a ton of cash. We have one of the best financial profiles in enterprise software. So part of the reason I came here and got excited about coming here was, as we just generate more and more and more cash, that becomes an opportunity for corp dev to have an impact and to, kind of bend the arc of growth and shareholder value creation for us. And so it's a very big responsibility, but I'm excited about it.
That is a great pitch, guys. Send your resume in to Vishal. All right, I'm gonna post his personal email on. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think your point about diversity is a really good one. And actually, when I think back on everything we talked about today, as we come up on the end here, like I feel like diversity is like a really, if I had to choose one word to kind of encapsulate like your career, it's like you've had such a diverse career in restructuring, then tech banking, then PE, then hedge fund, then corp dev and venture, and then even like when you were at the hedge fund, right? Like you guys had multi-strategy and global, and you were having to learn about all these different things. I just feel like and even now at ServiceNow, just like what you were talking about just now, you actually have purview over such a broad range of things that's like I don't think really typical for most corp dev teams. And so I have to say, like you probably have like, man, you must know so much. Like your skill set must be so well-rounded, like just what you've accumulated over the last, gosh, how long have I been working? Like 15 to 20 years,
Yeah.
something like I've lost count. But like, I guess on that note, like having had such a front row seat to all of these, really sought after career paths, let's call it, like for the college student today, who's one, maybe not really sure what they want to do. Two, they might be feeling overwhelmed by all of these options and they're trying to figure out like, what is the right path? Is there something and then three, like maybe there's someone out there who wants to have a career similar to yours where they can experience all these different amazing opportunities and have it be as dynamic and multifaceted as your career. Like,
Yeah.
do you have advice on, are there like certain things maybe they should focus on? Maybe not like, necessarily like 20 years from now, but let's say like just in those first few years of their career, like right out of college, are there certain things that they should be thinking about or doing?
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna sound like, generic old man advice, but number one, like just go and learn. Go places where you're gonna learn and
Yeah.
where you're gonna be pushed and where you're gonna be challenged. When we have interns, summer interns, and I interview them, I often tell them like I don't want you to come here and just kind of get a run of the mill experience in corp dev and then go back off to business school or wherever and then decide. I want to know that we've pushed you. My goal by the end of a summer internship is that you come back to me and you say, wow, like I got pushed hard to think differently, to think more critically, to to figure things out in a way I hadn't thought about before. And as a result of that, I have a new appreciation for corp dev. I have a new appreciation for what my skills are. And that might mean that they go back to private equity or banking or buy side or whatever they choose to do next is great. But I hope that we've pushed them. And I hope whatever job you get out of college, go somewhere where you're going to be challenged, pushed, and where you're going to learn. The second thing I would say is like love and obsess what you're working on in the moment. Like I have never not enjoyed a job that I've had. And I've had coworkers who are like, man, I hate banking so much. It's just exhausting. It's too much work. I'm like moving PowerPoint slides, PowerPoint logos around on a slide. Um, I've had people who've really struggled with how stressful the public market
Yeah.
role is. I've had people who, are struggling sometimes with the role of corp dev and the kinds of work we do. I've always embraced and obsessed and kind of loved just this is what we're doing and we need to stay relevant and we need to keep pushing ourselves to have impact. Along the way, no matter what job you have, you're going to do things that you may not enjoy, but that is part of the game. That is part of, you have to take the good with the bad. There's just not going to be a job that you get where you absolutely love every minute of everything you do. And if you
Yeah.
do, you should ask yourself if you're really pushing yourself or challenging yourself to keep going. So that's the second thing I would say. And then maybe third, interview. Go and interview for jobs. Go and challenge yourself. I actually like when I'm looking for a job, I love the interview process. It's
Mm,
stressful and it's challenging and people ask questions that you don't expect and they're testing you on what your background is, what you know, what you don't know. Like ask your friends to interview you even if you're not looking for looking to recruit. Go meet people and every conversation that you have is an interview, every single one. Embrace that, because you will learn a lot about yourself, you will learn a lot about what you're interested in. I talk to my friends even now about what I'm doing and I ask my friends to challenge me on whether I'm continuing to push the envelope
yeah.
and they ask really tough questions. So I would say, these are all things you could do just day to day without having to try very hard. And those things I think will set you up for being very thoughtful about what you want to do next and what you want to try. And you're going to have to try different things. I've had how many? One, two, three, four, five, six jobs now. And I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. So, it's again, it all sounds like old man, like, easy to talk about advice, but there's so much that you can learn from the day to day. You
Yeah.
really need to take advantage of that.
No, and I think also, first of all, it's great advice, but also I think what I always tell people is you don't have to know everything right away. You don't have to
You
know
won't. You
today.
absolutely won't know everything right away. You just
Yeah,
won't.
you don't have to know where you're going to end up 20 years from now. If you're not sure, that's okay. One of the most important things I think you can do is pick something that's going to give you more optionality down the road, right? I think that is one of the things that's really great about investment banking is that it doesn't pigeonhole you into a certain career path. Like, I don't know, like if you start your career as like an account, not to pick on accountants, but like if you start in accounting, you probably stay in accounting, right? Like, but like, you start in banking, you have all these different directions you could go in. And so you don't have to decide right now. And you can gather more information along the way and then make that decision down the road when you feel more informed. And then I think the thing that you said that really resonates with me is like your attitude in terms of how you go about the work that you have to do is like, yes, when you're in banking, you could view what you're doing as just like, oh, this is so stupid. And you see jokes like this online all the time, like on BSO or Reddit, or it's like, oh, I'm just moving some logos around or whatever. It's like, yeah, like you could look at it that way. Or like, you could, like when we were talking about all the things you learned working with Michael Grimes, is like, you
Yeah.
could look at it that way,
Yes.
right? And it's the exact same job, but
Yes.
like it's a completely different perspective and mindset. And yours is one full of like gratitude of like, oh my God, like I get to do this, versus someone who's just like bitching and moaning and it's like, oh my God, I just have to like move some logos. It's like, you're probably going to go down very different paths, even if you start in the same place,
Yes,
because your mindset is not right. Right.
totally.
And so I think that's like just phenomenal advice. And on that note, the last question I always end on is, what is one piece of advice, like knowing what you know now, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self? Because I know back when we were in college, maybe, I'm sure, we were also full of anxiety. And I'm sure you were going through recruiting and you didn't get any offers and whatever, right? And then now, 20 years later, you've had all the success that you had. You know way more now than you did back then. Like, hindsight's 2020. What's something you would tell your younger self?
So it's very simple. Have a point of view. Have a point of view. I think, there's no way to know for sure, but I think I could be even further along in my own career if
Mm,
I embraced that earlier and earlier and earlier. When you're looking at a company, would you invest in it or not? What do you think of the leadership? Have a point of view on those things. What do you think of the strategy? What would you do if you were the CEO? We talk about this a lot internally at ServiceNow. In conversations with my boss, he's an incredible mentor for me, and I learn a ton from him every day, every conversation we have. I tell him, I'm like, Phil, I'm going to talk to you now about if I was wearing the CEO hat, here's how I would think about this. Now let me take the CEO hat off and put the CFO hat on. Here's how I think about this. That turns into really rich conversation, and I could have been doing that in banking. I could have been doing that more in private equity, and I didn't get there. To be honest with you, I didn't get there until I got into the public markets and I learned from my PM on what the stakes were if I had a point of view that we could bet on, or if I had a point of view that was misinformed. So no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're looking at, whether you're studying in college, whether you're looking at companies, whether you're in banking, private equity, public markets, corp dev, whatever, have a point of view and challenge and ask yourself, what do I think about this company, about this individual, about this situation, and how would I do it differently if I was the decision maker? Those things are just so valuable as a mindset as you go through your entire career, no matter what you're doing.
yeah, that is so good. And if I could add something to that, I would say, have your point of view and be willing to defend it, but also be willing to admit when you're wrong,
Yes, yes.
because sometimes you are going to be wrong,
More
or even now.
often than not. Like your point of view
Yeah,
needs to be formed, and then you need to be willing to change it as you get more information.
yeah, because even as I run my business now, I'm constantly having to make decisions. I'm constantly having to discuss different things with different people on the team, and sometimes people disagree with me, and it's very easy for me in a position of leadership to just say like, well, like it's my way or the highway, or I'm right, you're wrong because I'm the boss or whatever, right? But a lot of times, like, I don't know everything, and sometimes people tell me stuff that I initially disagree with, and then but I give them the opportunity to convince me, and if they can convince me, then I'm flexible enough to change my point of view. And that has served me really, really well, because the best ideas can come from anywhere,
Yes.
sometimes it's not going to come from you.
I think it's so, Mark Twain had said, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know that just ain't so, right? Like one of the most powerful things you can do in a conversation with a leader at a company, with an investor, whoever, is they might say, "Hey, what about this?" or "Are you worried about this?" or "What do you think about this?" And the most powerful thing you can say is, "Actually, I thought about that. And let me tell you how I pressure tested, and researched that, or thought about that, or went deeper on that. I had the same instinct initially, and it turned out I was wrong on that. Here's how I got to this deeper second derivative, third derivative conclusion." It is so powerful in those conversations when you demonstrate to someone, "Hey, I thought about that. I had the same instinct you did. It turned out I was wrong." You're not telling them they're wrong. You're saying,
Yeah.
"I went down that rabbit hole on my own because I'm interested, I'm curious, and I turned out I was wrong, and here's what I learned and discovered." And then it's up to them to decide if they want to adopt that same conclusion that you drew. Very powerful. Like I can't tell you how many times in conversation it's just, again, like you don't know which 5% is going to matter. Have a point of view and be willing to change it as you get more information. And if you go 2 or 3 layers down that path, you're just going to be so much more thoughtful and useful in conversation than most everyone else. You just have
Absolutely.
to embrace that.
Absolutely. That's so good. And I think that's a good note to end on. So you've been so generous with your time. Honestly, like I wasn't even expecting to go this long, but it's such a
Well,
great,
I'm sorry you
great
have two
conversation.
hours plus to edit now.
I don't mind at all. No, this is fun. I mean, I think I went this on because it was such an enjoyable conversation. Like I said, I've really been enjoying doing these episodes because it just allows me to catch up with people that I haven't spoken to in a really long time, and also hear about their story and all the success they've had and how they made decisions. And I learned a lot from it myself as well. And so, again, thank you so much for doing this. And I'm sure our audience gained just a ton of insights and learning from this as well. So really appreciate you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for thinking of me. And I hope we don't wait another 15 years to catch up again.
I'll bring you back on the podcast again in 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
No, man. Yeah. And, best of luck with everything at ServiceNow. I mean, you guys are crushing it. I see it like, dude, your stock price has gone up like 3x since you joined or something. So great hire. And yeah, best of luck with everything. And also, with the family as well. I know you have 2 kids and enjoy that,
Thank you.
It's a fun time right now.
Same to you. Same to you. Awesome.
Absolutely. All right, man. Thanks a lot. And we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.